It is my directive to ensure the safety and security of everyone in Donegal. Oh no, we're being attacked. Quickly, rally the defense. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilor, and today we're going to go over the first week and a half-ish, however long it's been now, of the War Within and talk about some of the things that I've been able to experience so far. We're going to cover things like the early access period and how that went in practice now that we've had some time to see what the ongoing effects of that are going to be. We're going to talk about the leveling nerf and the effects of that and how that whole thing went down. We'll talk about the Earthen a little bit, and also just this general sense from a lot of players that I've been seeing of there just being nothing to do for the first couple of weeks. So first off, let's talk about the early access period and how that went. And I think a lot of what I said in the video previous to this one, two videos ago, I think at this point, is still accurate. And a lot of what I sort of expected to be the case for it ended up somewhat coming to fruition. Now, a lot of people said in response to that video, it's not that big of a deal, and you're absolutely correct. There's nothing about the early access period that's going to ruin the expansion for anyone. No one is so far ahead that you can't catch up, and no one has gotten such a massive advantage from the early access period, with one potential exception that we'll talk about in a second that I don't really think is that big of a deal. But anyway, no one's gotten really so much of an advantage in the early access period that everyone else feels like they're playing a different game now, or they're all just trying to catch up. That's definitely not turned out to be the case. The point that I was making in that video, and the point that I will still and continue to make, is not that bad isn't necessarily good, right? Like saying something isn't actually a problem. It's not the issues that it caused aren't actually that severe. Sure, yes, the issues that it caused aren't actually that severe, and I don't feel like anyone should be quitting World of Warcraft over the early access period. It's really not that big of a deal, but it is a deal in some sense. And is this deal good or bad overall? And I think I'm still on the camp of ultimately this was not a good thing for the game, because the one effect that it did have that I definitely saw within my own community, and I know a lot of people have been talking about elsewhere as well, is that it has split up friend groups. It has taken people that wanted to be playing with each other on day one. They wanted to go into the expansion together. And those that purchased the early access period, they got the epic edition or whatever the highest level edition was of I can't remember the exact terminology off the top of my head right now, but they got the early access period. Those players obviously then wanted to use that early access period, so they went in right away. And then the people that didn't get that early access period, maybe they didn't want to spend that much money on World of Warcraft, that's fine. Those people had to wait a few days. So if that was a group of friends that wanted to play together, the early access period kind of made that impossible. At the very least, it made it so that you're now playing with your friends on their alts or something, and then it's content that they've all already gone through, and they're not as excited to do it the second time. You're not experiencing things for the first time together. That social aspect of we're going to go into this expansion and play together with each other was definitely lost for people who were affected by that. Now, is that everyone? Absolutely not. There's a lot of people that either all of them got the early access period, or maybe they're just going in, they're playing by themselves, and they're going to catch up with their friends later. Maybe they're less concerned about being able to go into the expansion altogether. So for a lot of people, it probably doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things regardless. But for those players that it does affect, it was a negative thing. And I don't think it added much in the way of a positive thing to much of the rest of the player base. Obviously, again, there's going to be exceptions. There are people who would much rather be able to start playing on Thursday than wanted to start playing on Monday. You know, weekends and all of that is a thing. Personally, to me, that problem could also be resolved by just, releasing on Thursday instead of releasing on Monday, but whatever. We won't go. There are some logistical reasons why that can be dangerous, but then they have to do it anyway because of early access. I don't know. Anyway, I feel like ultimately that splitting of the player base did occur, or those splitting of those friend groups at least did occur. And that still makes me lean ultimately on the side of not really being the biggest fan of the early access period existing. Again, it's not the end of the world. It's not like ruining the game for anyone, really. It's just kind of a frustrating intro to an expansion if you were one of those players that wanted to be able to play with all of your friends immediately and go into the new content and go into the new expansion as a friend group. I'm not going to harp on this too much, though. I talked about it so much over the last couple of episodes that I'm really not going to worry about going into that too much. You can go back and watch, again, 2 episodes prior to this one was when I really looked into the early access thing and talked about a lot of the positives and negatives. So you can go back and watch that video. if you want to hear all of my thoughts on it, because pretty much everything I said there still stands true. It kind of worked out exactly how I was expecting it to. The one thing that I did not expect was the leveling nerf that came into play. Now, this nerf ended up going in on, it was Tuesday or Wednesday, pretty much within the couple of days after War Within's official release. So this was right after most players got their hands on the expansion finally. Anyone who didn't have early access at least got their hands on the expansion finally. There was a nerf that went in that reduced the power that your character had against lower level mobs in the War Within, especially on that like curve from 70 to about 74 to 75. There was a more noticeable impact in those areas. Now, first thing I want to say about this nerf is that it was absolutely needed. It was, I am very much in favor of this nerf having gone in. And the reason for that was, did anyone try to do a normal dungeon at level 70, like 8? When there was somebody at level 70 in there just clearing through everything and just murdering, and you couldn't even cast your spells. It was like impossible to even do anything while one warrior or survival hunter or whatever just cleared the entire instance for you, and you were just trying to keep up with them the whole time. Like, that was a problem, and that was a problem that was caused by the scaling that was in place at the time. So they dialed it back a little bit. Now, I want to be clear on another thing as well. It was not that big of a dial back. It is still very much the case that a level 70 warrior can probably kind of plow through most of, especially if they have like full Dragonflight gear, can probably plow through most of the dungeon. And as long as there is a healer somewhere in the vicinity to occasionally cast a spell in their general direction, they're still going to be able to clear the whole thing. It's still very much been the case that if you have these lower level players in your normal dungeons, I was leveling my monk recently as brewmaster and I was tanking. And there was one instance in particular that occurred, and this is well after the nerf, by the way. There was one instance in particular that occurred where there was me and 2 of the DPS and the healer, and we kind of became one group, and then there was a survival hunter, and we were almost leapfrogging pulls throughout the dungeon. And I thought it was kind of funny, honestly. Like, I wasn't upset by it. I just thought it was kind of silly and kind of funny and kind of goofy. But it was basically, we would clear a pull, the survival hunter would just run past us into the next pack, kill that whole pack, then we would go to the next pack while the survival hunter was clearing that up, and we just kind of leapfrogging these pulls. And it made for a very funny sort of way to clear the dungeon. But is that something that should continue to exist and should be the de facto way for level 70 normal dungeons, or level 70 to 80 normal dungeons, like as you're leveling? Should that be how it is all of the time? No, absolutely not. It was ridiculous. It's been basically unnoticeable, the nerf out in the open world. It's been basically unnoticeable whatsoever. You probably, like, honestly, were incredibly undergeared. You probably can't really tell the difference in terms of how difficult the mobs are to clear. So the questing and even the delves experience is largely untouched by virtue of this nerf. It really just comes down to those dungeons and that sort of content where this is something that was meant to be difficult. Like, this is an elite boss at the end of a big quest chain or something. I don't know, whatever else you came across. This was meant to be difficult. And if you were low level enough, you just kind of sneezed on it and it fell over. So I still very much am in favor of the nerf going in. The only like weirdness about this whole thing is that people who had the early access period ended up feeling like they got way more time with this before the nerf actually went in. So a lot of those people were able to level a ton of alts super, super fast, like multiple alts per day being leveled in a normal play session just by plowing through all these dungeons super quickly. And now that the nerf has gone in, again, it's still fast, but not as fast, which has had the effect of, again, this, I don't think any of this is like long-term problematic whatsoever. And by the time season 1 releases, it won't even be a thing. Like, everyone who wants to level these alts will have had plenty of time to level their alts. It's not going to be a problem. It does just kind of make it feel like an almost unintended, unannounced like perk of the early access. And that's the part of it that I'm not as, I don't like that it worked out that way. I've seen a lot of people suggest that maybe they should have left the leveling nerf off for like another week, like wait until like this upcoming Tuesday, the Tuesday that you're probably seeing this video if you're watching on YouTube, is when the newest campaign quest, the story campaign. I don't know why I can't think of that word right now, but that's when the newest campaign quest comes in. There's a lot of people who are suggested maybe they should wait until then to do it. The reality is there kind of isn't a good time to put a nerf like that into the game. There kind of isn't a point where it's like, okay, this is the safe point. Do I think they could have waited another couple of days just to make it feel less like an early access perk? Yes, I think that probably would have been a good idea, but I'm talking about like put it out on that Friday or that Thursday or something instead of like within the 48 hours after the expansion has officially released. And I also don't think Blizzard really did themselves any favors with the specific way that this was communicated to players, because as people were reading this when it was first being announced, it sounded like this massive nerf that was going to come in. It's like, oh my God, they have taken it. They're going to go and just gut leveling entirely, and leveling is going to be so much harder after this nerf goes in. To the extent that I know a lot of players who just haven't even bothered trying leveling alts after the nerf went in, because they're like, why would I do that? It's not as easy as it used to be. The reality is it's still pretty much as easy as it used to be. It's just not as ridiculous anymore. It's still very quick to level alts in the War Within, which is good because they're doing the whole warband thing and the way all of that works. It's still very easy to level your alts. I just think the way that they announced it, they made it sound like a bigger nerf that it was going to be. And I also think they could have spent a little bit more time explaining what the actual direct issue is, because a lot of the wording that was used was relatively vague, just talking about things like, oh, you're not able to get your rotation off without, like, they should have talked about dungeons more, essentially, is where I'm going with this. It should have been like, hey, this is happening in dungeons, and this is making dungeons absolutely nonsense, and this should not be how this is experienced, full stop. And like, if we were looking another 2 or 3 weeks into the expansion and this was still how normal dungeons were being cleared, everyone would be like, oh yeah, normal dungeons are just a joke. Why would this is just ridiculous. This is how this goes, and it's silly. And I think it would have been ultimately a negative thing for, I think majority of people would have looked at it and said, this is gross, if it had continued the way that it was for much longer, if that had just become the standard way that all this stuff worked. So again, I agree with the nerf actually going in. They just kind of overstated how much of a nerf it was actually going to be and understated the issue that was being resolved, which makes the players that are reading this announcement or that are hearing about this and then going and talking to their friends about it, it makes it sound way worse than it actually was. Now, I know there's probably going to be some people who are like, no, I preferred it to stay that way. And that's fine. Like, I don't have a problem with that opinion whatsoever. I think for me looking at this, and I think for a lot of players, maybe not directly, but subconsciously almost might look at this and say, like, it's just less fun. Like, it's just not as enjoyable. And obviously sometimes when something is just hyper efficient, that can feel like it's fun because you're like, oh yeah, I'm having so much fun because my alts are leveling so fast. In fact, that was a thing that I heard a lot about the Mists of Pandaria remix, was people saying, I'm having so much fun because I'm leveling so many alts so fast. And for me, that's just not a thing. Like, the fact that it's efficient doesn't make it fun for me directly. It can make it efficient. Efficient is good. I do like things that are efficient, but I can like something for being efficient and still not think it's fun, right? Like back in the day in Mists of Pandaria, for example, one of the most efficient ways to get your lesser charms of good fortune was pet battles. And it was super efficient. Like, I literally had a little dinosaur pet that I just went around Orgrimmar doing level 1 pet battles. I literally named him I Poop Charms, which I think eventually got hit by the Blizzard filters and he got forced renamed, which is kind of funny. But I had this little dinosaur pet called I Poop Charms that literally all I did was go around and do all these level 1 pet battles and get lesser charms of good fortune constantly from this. And that was how I was getting my charms. It was super efficient, and I appreciated that I had to do less out in the world farming to get those lesser charms of good fortune. But it was definitely not something I was having fun with. It was definitely not something that I looked at and say, man, that's a great time going around Orgrimmar and doing level 1 pet battles with a level 20 pet constantly. It's not enjoyable gameplay experience. So I think it's important to remember that just because something is efficient doesn't necessarily mean it's fun. And the goal should always be to, like, still have efficient ways to do things, still let players find and pick and choose what they believe is the most efficient way to do things, but make sure it's actually fun to play in the process. And in the case of dungeons and the way that leveling was in the War Within, it was definitely not fun. It was silly. It was the sort of thing that having, like, I did a couple of dungeons while it was still in effect, and it was like, oh my God, yes, I'm very glad that they're nerfing this because this is just dumb. But after the nerf went in, you can still just farm the heck out of normal dungeons. They're not hard at all. I'm still, as a brewmaster, pulling like 4 or 5 packs at a time and mostly healing myself in the process. Or still was. I've finished leveling now. But anyway, it's still very fast and it's still very efficient. But now you actually get to play the game a little bit while you're going through it. So I'm going to stop rambling about the leveling nerfs now. But ultimately, I think it was a good thing overall. I'm glad that they did it. I just wish that it hadn't collided with the early access period in such a way that made it feel like an unannounced early access perk. Because you can imagine, like, if one of the stated early access perks, like on the listing of features on the website, if they had said, and you get to level your alts much faster, and you get to plow through dungeons so much faster, like that was one of the like bullet items on that list, people would have lost their minds. And I think that was where a lot of the frustration with the leveling nerfs actually is coming from, is people feeling like, well, I didn't have early access, so I didn't get to level my 10 alts while it was super fast to level 10 alts. So now I am behind, and I've missed out on this thing that only the early access people really got full access to. And that I totally understand. Again, leveling those alts is still super fast. It's not going to take you any time at all. You can still plow through dungeons very, very quickly, but I understand the frustration at the very least. Moving on, I want to talk about Earthen a little bit. And there's actually two topics that I want to hit on Earthen. One of them is kind of just silly, and the other one, we're going to talk about the Earthen unlock process in a minute. But first, I want to just ask the question of what's going on with the Earthen voice acting. Like, it seems to me, here's my theory. Maybe this is some tinfoil hat stuff, but here's my theory. It sounds like the voice directors and so on, and whatever they were doing in the scripting or somewhere along the line, they told the voice actors, you should sound a bit robotic, right? Which kind of makes sense. Earthen are Titan constructs. They come from the Titans. Most Titans that we've experienced and encountered in the game have that kind of robot-y sort of voice to them. If you think about like Mother most recently, Mother was very much like, hello, I am robot, beep, boop, beep, boop. I don't think that's actually something that she would have ever said, but you know where I'm going with this. Very sort of robotic construct sort of sense. The biggest difference is that the majority of those, especially the ones that were meant to sound extra robotic, had like extra voice effects that were put on them. Like there was extra effects that were put on the actual voice lines to encourage and make it more clear. This is meant to sound robotic. This is meant to sound like a construct. And so many of the Earthen just sound bored. Like if you think the difference between a robot going danger, 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 like you imagine the robots from Nomragon. If it was just some guy going intruder alert, like that just sounds like they're bored. That just sounds like they're not interested. It's kind of the point of the intro to this video, is just kind of sounds like they're just saying the lines. And if it weren't for the fact that there are so many games where the voice actors literally are just saying the lines and they're like, just get this out of there and then we're done. If it wasn't for the fact that bad voice acting exists, people would probably be more in tune. It would be at least easier to understand. These are Earthen. These are constructs. They're meant to sound a bit robotic. But in practice, for me at least, in the War Within, it's a bit uncanny valley. It just ends up sounding like they're bored, like I said. With one exception, which is Wenbrant from the Cinderbrew Meadery, who it seems like they took all of the emotion that every other Earthen was not expressing, and they like had a quota or something, and they had to put it all into Wenbrant, who's now like, oh, my meat. And it's actually kind of hilarious. It's very, very entertaining to me. But we have like this one Earthen who's incredibly emotional and incredibly like, he's just really, really getting into it. And then you have people like the Storm Rider guy whose name Baelgrim. There we go. We have people like him who are like, we must stop them. They are attacking. And it's just like, oh my God, you sound bored and you sound like you're not interested. But that's mostly just a nitpick. It probably doesn't bother a lot of people. In fact, most people probably just go, what the heck is this voice acting, and move on. It's just something that, as someone who is an amateur voice actor myself, it's something that I picked up on very quickly. I was like, dang, I think I know what's happening here. I don't think it's that the voice actor is delivering the lines wrong, because it's not just one character. It's the majority of Earthen characters that are like this. And it's not the majority of characters full stop. It's just Earthen, and it's just the majority of Earthen, which makes me think that it was probably something in the direction to be like, make them sound a bit like a construct, make them sound a bit robotic. And then they were just missing the extra layer of like voice effects or whatever to put on top of it that actually made it sound robotic. And instead they just sound bored. The other thing that I want to talk about in regards to Earthen is the fact that we haven't been able to unlock them yet. Now we will be, in fact, by the time you see this video, they may already be available, because it is on September 3rd, which is the day that this video is going up on YouTube. That's when supposedly they're going to be made available, when the last chapter of the initial campaign unlocks and we're able to do that quest. So theoretically, they are now already available, and we have that week between now essentially and season 1 release to be able to go in and level them. It just felt a little bit weird that we didn't have that for the rest of the time. Like a lot of people who are now spending a lot of their time just leveling alts or doing like renowned stuff, which is to your entire warband. So you could be doing that on an alt. Now would be a great time for them to be leveling their new Earthen characters. Now would be a great time to be doing that. And there's so many points in the campaign where it feels like, yes, now we have allied with the Earthen, but it feels weird that we're literally using their city as our main faction hub or as our main expansion hub, the main city for the entire expansion, Dornogal. We literally, that's like one of the first 7 quests of the expansion is going to Dornogal and moving into that city. Like we have obviously allied with them very, very early on in the campaign. And sure, it's fine. There's a couple other quests that you need to do here and there to like clean up their messes. And then they have like the ability to come and join you. It's just felt a bit weird that they're not already available. Like it feels like they should already be available, both from terms of story and also just from just having it as something to do in this time period before season 1 actually releases, being able to level your Earthen character. I don't know. That's just something that struck me as a little bit odd. It seems like we should have had access to them already. Now, again, we're getting them very soon. By the time you see this video, they're probably already available. And there is still that week between that campaign chapter unlocking and the season 1 launch. So there is still time to level up your Earthen, get it geared up. If you want to main an Earthen in this expansion, you still have time to do that. It just, I don't know. Like I said, it felt a bit weird. But this all kind of brings me to the next topic that I wanted to talk about, which is this general sense of there not being much to do between the release of The War Within and season 1 actually unlocking. And I was definitely someone who was in the camp of I just expected there to not be much to do. And I feel like that has carried on when it actually kind of shouldn't be. There actually is a lot to be doing. Like there's lots of renown leveling that you could be doing right now. And those renown rewards are actually useful, especially as we first start going into season 1. There's some high item level gear that becomes available. It's then gear that becomes warbound, so you're able to get it for your alts very easily as well. Like you're gonna want those renowns unlocked. So renown grinding, that's definitely something that's available. Alts, obviously, like leveling alts, that's a big deal. You can get your alts leveled. I know a lot of people, especially in the modern day for World of Warcraft, it's become sort of accepted that the way to play the game is you probably have a couple of alts. Obviously, there are still people that tend to stick to just one character, and if that's you, then sure, that's fine. But it is an option that's available. And another thing is heroic dungeons have actually been a lot more, like being able to do heroics has actually been a lot more interesting and useful to me than I expected it to. Yes, all of this gear is going to be replaced very soon. Yes, even the item levels for heroic drops is going to go up, theoretically at least, when season 1 launches. So you can't like completely outfit your character before season 1 actually launches, but you can go into season 1 with a character that is wearing good gear versus going into season 1 with a character that's just wearing a bunch of quest screens and stuff. And that's useful. That's something valid to do. Another point that I want to make sure that I mention in terms of leveling alts is that you actually, there's an achievement. I didn't actually really know about this until just before this episode. My friend Spencer from the Starting Zone pointed it out to me. There is actually an achievement, and it's a stacking achievement. You can get up to a total of a 25% XP bonus for all characters on your account going up to level 80 by leveling alts. So the first time you level a character, your next character gets a 5% XP bonus, then a 10% XP bonus, up to 5, at which point you have a 25% XP bonus. That's a useful thing to do. There's also things like you can unlock flight, whatever it's called. Flight Master? No, that's the wrong word. I can't remember. Pathfinder. There we go. Apparently I'm just forgetting words today. But you can unlock Pathfinder. You can get the majority of that done, if not all of it. In fact, I think you can do all of it at this point. There's a few other things that like, there's all the bugs and stuff down in Ajkahet. There's all the different like things you can unlock with them. There's delves. You can't go very high with delves right now, but you could be, if you want to go hard on delves once season 1 launches, you can at least be leveling Bran up and getting him a bunch of stuff for that. There's definitely things that can be done, and it's definitely the case that I have not found myself with a lack of things to do for The War Within going into season 1. And that's as someone who is a full-time content creator. Like I'm someone who can spend all day, every day playing this video game. That's like if I was someone who was still trying to fit this around a 9-to-5 job, I would have even more things to do. I would probably feel like I don't have enough time to do all the stuff that's available. Now, Is it as much content as there will be when season 1 releases? Absolutely not. And as someone who loves Mythic Plus and is really looking forward to Mythic Plus, I can't wait for that launch so that I can get in there and start doing the M Plus and start pushing keys and all of that. I'm very, very excited for that. A couple of us have been calling it the casual plus plus approach to the War Within. We're probably not going to get into Mythic rating anytime soon, but we can at least do the content that we are setting ourselves out to do as like professionally is the wrong word, as hardcore as we can. So there's, I don't know. This is more just a general ramble of me saying, if you feel like there's absolutely nothing to do right now, it is either because you just don't want to do the things that are available, which is fine. Like if it's not content for you, then it's not content for you. You don't feel like you got to be forced into doing it. Or other thought, maybe look into some of the things that are available, because some of those things may be things that you want to do later on. And right now, when you can't be doing Mythic Plus anyway, you can't be rating anyway, is a great time to get that stuff done and out of the way so you don't have to think about it once the season 1 actually starts. But that basically summarizes my experience with the War Within for the first like week and a half that we've had so far. I've been having an absolute blast. I've been streaming it almost every day, at least a little bit here and there, almost every day, mixed in with things like Grand Theft Auto roleplay. And I've been playing this game called Deadlock, which is, it's fun. I don't know how long term I'm going to be playing it, but it's definitely fun. Been mixing that in, but spending a lot of time playing the War Within over the last couple of weeks, or last week and a half, I should say. I'm having a blast. My first character that I leveled my shaman. This may come as a surprise to a lot of you, but I've literally never mained a shaman. Like that was a meme that came out of me talking about one of my alts. And a lot of people seem to think that that means that I main a shaman. This is the first time that a shaman has been the first character I've leveled in an expansion. And I'm still not even sure if I'm going to end up maining it. I might switch back to Windwalker. I always end up going back to Windwalker. Windwalker just feels right to me. But we'll see. Well, I'm still leveling other characters and we'll see what I settle on. But the shaman has been my primary focus, at least at the start. Got that leveled up right away. Got that as geared as I could in heroic dungeons. Now working on, I have the Windwalker that I've now leveled. Gonna be leveling a Warlock next because chat picked that actually. Twitch chat got to pick what my next alt was going to be and selected Warlock. So we're going to be leveling a Demonology Warlock next. And then after that, I don't know. I might do my Death Knight next. I might do Demon Hunter next. I feel like a tank that I like, because I don't hate Brewmaster as much as I used to, but it's still not my favorite tank spec to play. So I don't know. I'll probably experiment with some tanks or something real soon. But we'll see. And I will also be doing, as soon as Mythic Plus is out, we will be spending some time doing Mythic Plus keys with viewers as well. So if you're interested in joining in on that, we do have a Sounds Good community that you can join. That's where we're going to be doing the majority of this this grouping from. So we will have that available. Which reminds me of one other thing that I wanted to complain about. I'm frustrated that heroic dungeons still cannot be queued cross-faction. They've done cross-faction pretty much. We're down to cross-faction guilds at this point. But you can't, if you're an alliance player and you want to play with your guildie who's a horde player, you can't queue heroic dungeons. You can still zone in. If you make a 5-player group, you can still zone into the heroic dungeons, and that's what we've been doing. But it's frustrating that you can't just random queue them like you can anything else. Blizzard did have a statement they made about this recently. It was Michael Bybee, who's the, I think, production director is his title now, said something recently where they were talking about the concept of why it's not currently available. They said, we really feel like if you're a player who is super pro Horde or pro Alliance, and that's what you identify as, you don't want to find yourself queued up with a bunch of random Alliance people that you didn't sign up for. I can understand that perspective for sure. If you're a player who is like, I'm Horde all day, every day, or I'm Alliance all day, every day, I can see why they would want to allow that player to avoid then grouping, like automatically grouping with players of the opposite faction. I can understand the line of thinking. I don't know how big, like, let me know in the comments if that's you, if you're an Alliance player who just never wants to see Horde in your random queued dungeons, or if you're a Horde player who just never wants to see Alliance in your random dungeons. I feel like as soon as you move into Mythic Plus, like that's just going to end up happening anyway. You're going to have cross faction groups constantly as soon as you're in Mythic Plus. So it does feel like that's something that can only go so far before it no longer becomes available to you. But if that's you, let me know. It seems like a little bit of a weird line to draw to me. That said, they did say in the same interview that they are working on a method to allow, like, once you already have a group formed, then you can queue, and it just doesn't tell you. Like right now, if you try to queue with cross-faction members in your group, it says that you can't. They're working on a method to not have it say that you can't, which sounds like the easiest issue to resolve, but I can say from experience working at the company for a long time, there's a lot of weird stuff that happens in WoW's backend. So it probably is actually something that's relatively complicated for them to put together. There is actually probably a reason why they can't just flip a switch and turn that on. But they did say that they're working on it and it will hopefully be available in the War Within soon. I'm just a little disappointed that it wasn't available in this like pre-season 1 period, because I don't know how much queuing heroic dungeons I'm going to be doing with pre-made groups once season 1 is actually out. I'm going to be doing Mythic Plus, and that's just going to be us zoning in. So it's one thing that was a mild frustration for me. Like I said, we did find a way to work around it, which was basically form a full five-player group and then zone in, but not everyone can do that. So is what it is. Anyway, we're going to move on to questions. I had a really good one come in from Baz Vision Geek on YouTube, who said, "Hey, Lore, would it be possible to make a video about housing in WoW? Which system would you prefer? ESO, Final Fantasy XIV, SWTOR, etc. And why has 20 years gone by without Blizz really doing it?" So I'm probably not going to make a dedicated video about housing in WoW, at least not like in the immediate future. It might be a topic that I look into and do like a deep dive on sometime in the future, because it is an interesting idea to explore. I'm probably not going to do like a full video on it anytime soon, like I said. So I did want to answer the question as best as I could in the short term. And looking at like things like different houses. So first of all, let me say this. Yes, I am very much in favor of player housing in World of Warcraft. I'm very much in favor of player housing in general in MMORPGs, as long as it's done well. It's something that I've always enjoyed in games where I'm able to like have my own little part in the world, have my own little spot, and feel like this is for me. Especially when you can get into the systems where you can start decorating it and you can set stuff up and you can build out your own little area and just have it be yours, right? Have it be something that you can say this is my character's home in the world of this MMORPG. I've messed with a few different systems in the past, or at least seen and experienced a few different systems in the past. I have to say, I haven't experienced ESO's system, and I actually haven't experienced SWTOR's system either. Outside of, I guess you had like your ship or something, but it's honestly been a long time since I played Star Wars: The Old Republic, so I could be misremembering things there. I did play enough Final Fantasy XIV to decide that I liked what you could do with the housing system in Final Fantasy XIV. I really hate the way that you buy a house. It ends up feeling like something that a lot of players just can't access, or in order to get a house, you have to like literally camp and be like, ooh, this house looks like they haven't changed anything here in a long time. And this player hasn't logged on in a long time, so they're probably going to lose it. So I need to sit around and wait for that to get freed up so that I can then buy it. Having the houses, especially when they have the multiple districts that are all basically the same anyway, it feels really weird to have that limitation of there are only X number of houses on the server. You have to, if you want to buy one, you have to get one. Like, given that they have the whole thing instanced already, it just kind of seems like they could pretty easily add on more instances based on the number of players that want to actually participate in that system. I can understand some of the logic behind it. I'm assuming that a lot of it comes down to wanting each place to feel like a neighborhood where there are players that are actually like you can go around and you can actually see, like, you have neighbors, they're changing things. You can see other players doing stuff with their houses. And if they went to like infinite numbers of these different districts available, then you'd end up with a lot of them where a lot of the lots either aren't taken, or you'd end up with a lot of them where this guy just hasn't logged on in 6 months or years. And so this house just hasn't changed in a long time. And so you end up being like the only active player in your district. I can definitely see why they wouldn't want to go that route. But there are other ways to approach this. In fact, one game that I'm going to call out here that I think did player housing not quite perfect, there are still issues with the system, but pretty good, is actually New World. So in New World, the way player housing works is you go to one of the cities and there are just houses, and you can see them, you can walk up to them, you can go inside of them, you can look around, and you can purchase these houses, and anyone can purchase any house, right? Like as long as you have the money for it, anyone can purchase any house. They just then also have this sort of like housing point system that has a lot to do with the number of decorations and different things that you have in there, and the way that you've laid things out to some extent. There are actually methods by which there's housing points that you can earn. And whoever has the most housing points in a plot, that is the house that gets displayed to people when they walk past. So If somebody really, really decks out their house and they make sure that they've earned the most housing points, there's other factors that contribute to this. I'll get into it in a second. If someone really, really decks out their house, you're going to see their house when you walk past, unless you also own it, in which case you will see your own house instead. But the average person walking through this city will see that house over there. They will see whatever decorations. Apparently there's fireworks going on outside my house. It's 1 a.m. on a Sunday. What? Anyway, it was very distracting. You'll see their house. You'll see whatever decorations they put out, etc. Obviously, that then gets into things like, okay, they do need to have some level of moderation of like if someone decides to put something horribly offensive, then like put bathtubs in a shape that becomes offensive and so on. Like there's some level of moderation that they have to do that. And it's certainly been the case that sometimes people are able to get so many housing points just by number of items that they just clutter the crap out of it and it looks horrible, but it ends up being the house that's on the top of the housing points anyway. New World also did some weird stuff where you could earn housing points by doing some of the quests that had nothing to do with actually doing the housing yourself, but by doing some of the quests and things that were inside of that town, you would like multiply your housing points, which has occasionally led to someone who just plays the game a lot. They haven't really done anything with their house, but they play the game a lot and they just happen to end up having the most housing points as a result. So there are some issues with the system, but that core idea of having, there's these houses that are just available inside of this city and you can go up to them and if it's like, that's where I want to live, you can do that. You can buy that and you can live there. And you will have neighbors that you see, and you will see a house. You will see a player owned house with all their decorations and everything in all of these plots. And they just use this housing point system. Some other system would also work, or the same system, but with some better implementation for it, would also work to be able to make sure that the houses look like they're being lived in and not have it be 100% instance content. Make sure that you see your house when you walk up to it. It's just a cool system that I've always really liked the idea of. And I played around with it a lot when I was playing New World, and I did really like their housing system. Again, there were a couple of issues that I would like to see resolved, but I think that sort of idea is the closest to perfect that any place that I've at least experienced has gotten as of yet, as far as putting the houses actually interactable into the world where you actually see them while you're walking around. But obviously everyone has different tastes in terms of what they want to do with their house. Maybe you don't want other people to see your house. Maybe you want it to be your own little thing and you prefer the very instant sort of setups. Maybe that's something that you prefer. I know that like WildStar, for example, has gotten a lot of credit, or did get a lot of credit back when it had its whole, they had like a miniature planet thing that they did. I don't remember a lot of the specifics of it, and it's very hard to go and look at because WildStar is gone, RIP. But WildStar had a housing system that people really liked. I've heard lots about the ESO housing system. I haven't directly experienced it myself, so I can't really comment on it. But I know that people really liked that system as well. And then there's been other games, like even Anarchy Online, all the way back in 1999 or whenever that originally came out, that actually originally had some form of player housing. You could have your own little apartment. Could you decorate it? Not really. There wasn't much you could do with the things. But you did have your own personal apartment. And in fact, in the Shadowlands expansion for Anarchy Online, they let you get this like luxury apartment that was super cool for back then. So I've always enjoyed the idea of player housing. I would love to see it come to World of Warcraft in some capacity. I think New World's system has some really good ideas to it. And I would hope that if Blizzard were to implement some form of player housing, that at least look to that system for some inspiration. And that's going to wrap it up. Thank you all so much once again for watching. We're going to have a couple of very exciting weeks coming up in terms of Sounds Good Makes Sense content. I think next week we're probably going to talk about like guides and unless something else comes up, we're going to talk about like guides at the start of an expansion. We'll talk about stacked ranked and DPS charts and that sort of thing, because there's a lot of misconceptions about how those work that I think is important to get across to people, especially at the start of an expansion. And then we're going to do a deeper dive into the dungeons themselves once season 1 has actually started and I've had some time to get in there on Mythic Plus and really start to feel what these dungeons are like at endgame. So we're going to have a lot of interesting topics coming up here in the next couple of weeks. As always, if you want to hit that like and subscribe button, I'm doing the YouTuber thing right now. If you want to hit that like and subscribe button, I really appreciate it. Or leave me a comment below. In fact, if you have a question that you'd like to see answered here on the show, the best way to do that is to leave a comment here on YouTube. Or if you're a patron, go over to patreon.com/Devilor. In the comments for this episode, there will be a link to a form that you can fill out which will submit your question for use and consideration here on the show as well. And thank you once again to all of my patrons. I really, really do appreciate all of the support. Yeah, patreon.com/Devilor. Please do check it out. Anyway, that's enough rambling and plugging myself for today. I'm going to call it a night. Thank you so much once again. I'll see you later.